All right. Well, we're about to jump in here to join our pilgrim on his way. Oh, let me just ground for a second. Just empty out. Let the mother come through. All right. So he's been staying at that priest's place, and he met a young woman that he counseled about repeating the name of God and studying the Philokalia. But he had decided that that little church was too busy with all of the workers and doing the renovations and the accounting he was asked to do and whatnot. So he wants to move on. So he said to the priest, his last thing that he said to the priest of that small temple was, "Now let me go and give me your blessing on my lonely journey." But the priest did not want to let me go and tried to get me to stay. "What is there to hinder your praying here? Your work is nothing to speak of beyond stopping in the cathedral, in the chapel. You have your daily bread. You say your prayers then all day and all night, if you like, and live with God. You are useful here. You don't go in for silly gossip with the people who come here. You're a source of profit to the church. All that is worth more in God's sight than your prayers all by yourself. Why do you always want to be alone?" That's an interesting thing that he says that. Vivekananda teaches quite the opposite. He says one person, one devotee, realizing God on a mountaintop does more good to the world than all of the people doing service added together. Because you bring that divine love into the world, a pure love. Most of our service, for most of us, not for everybody probably, but for most of us, most of our service is tinged a little bit with ego, our desire to do good or whatnot like that. And so, really, your practice is the best gift that you can give to the world because it purifies everything that you do. It purifies you yourself so that those who experience you experience the divine and will feel that vibration, will feel that atmosphere that you develop and carry with yourself. In Swami Prabhutananda in Olima for the Memorial Day retreat, he would always tell people, he says, if you want to give a donation today, that's fine. But better would be if you come and practice in our shrine and leave that vibration of your holy practice in the shrine. That would be our preferred donation from you today.
Mm.
And so your practicing of your mantra or your sitting in the presence of Mother, that has an effect on the world at large. That brings it in. Holy Mother talks about that in that not Swami, Sri Ramakrishna was ushering in a whole new era, a new bringing in the Satya Yuga by his presence in the world. And so, of course, it's a difference in power, obviously, but your effect in the world will be beautiful from doing your practice, and it is the highest service that we can do to the world is our own realization, because all of the service that is done after that realization will be a great blessing because it will be selfless, it will be pure, and its effect will run far and deep. Why do you always want to be alone? Common prayer is pleasanter. God did not create man to think of himself only, but that men should help each other and lead each other along the path to salvation, each according to his strength. Think of the saints and the fathers of the church. They bustled about day and night. They cared for the needs of the church. They used to preach all over the place. They didn't sit down alone and hide themselves from people. Of course, that's true even with our direct disciples, but they all took that time to sit down and be alone. And there's some people who are called to that lonely life. Some people are called to that, and some people are called to service and monasticism, and all of it. All of us have our part. God is as diverse as the universe, obviously. That's his manifestation. So certainly by looking at his creation, we can see his diversity and how he blesses everything. I really like that idea of having all of those gurus. That fire can be a guru, a tree can be a guru, a mountain can be a guru. I remember sitting back in my 20s, sitting on a rocky seashore and, kind of turning to the universe and asking to be taught something. And so I just watched with the idea of being taught something. And I saw these rocks, in their patience, how smooth they become as the waves beat on them again and again and again, never losing their patience, never, never being able to escape or to determine their own way, but they have to surrender and be slowly ground down, by their experience in the world. And that's how life is. And so the world is our teacher. It really depends on our perspective. If we're open to being taught, if we're looking to be taught, then Mother will speak through the rocks and speak through the plants and speak through the animals, and everything will be to your benefit. Everything will conspire to your success as a seeker, to your realization. Everyone has his own gift from God, I answered. There have been many preachers, Father, but there have also been many hermits. Everyone does what he can as he sees his own line, with the thought that God himself shows him the way of his salvation. How do you get over the fact that many of the saints gave up their positions as bishops or priests or the rule of a monastery and went into the desert to get away from the fuss which comes from living with other people? Saint Isaac the Syrian, for instance, fled from the flock whose bishop he was, and the venerable Athanasius of Athos left his large monastery just because to them these places were a source of temptation, and they sincerely believed our Lord saying, "What shall it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul?" Ah, but they were saints, said the priest. And if, I answered, the very saints took steps to guard themselves from the dangers of mingling with people, what else, I ask you, can a feeble sinner do? So in the end, I said goodbye to this good priest, and he, out of the love in his heart, set me on my way. So there he just reiterated, taught us, you know. But it is important because even though we may not go out and live as a hermit in the desert, Thakur most definitely tells us that it's necessary for us to every now and then do a lonely retreat where you leave the world behind. You don't take your phone and your computer and your romance novels. You go out alone with whatever spiritual teaching you want to take with you, and you meditate in a place where there are no right angles of ego, I like to say. No buildings, well, you can have a building probably, but no noise, no distractions, no entertainment, and just be with yourself for a day or two. It's probably better if it's the first time to do it, just to do it for a solid day and see how it goes. I once knew a preacher who decided he was going to go do a week, and he had never done any solitary time like that before. And he came back and he was so dejected. It had just been a big failure for him. And so better, don't overshoot the moon when you start. Always start small and ask Mother's blessing and grow from there as you're inspired. That's an important teaching too from the aspect of ego. We all want to be heroes. And you can know that's from ego. And so don't bite off more than you can chew. Do what you know you can manage and do it well and grow from there. There's no need for heroes. Mother is our hero. Thakur is our hero. Swamiji, Jesus. These are the heroes. For us, just a humble going forward is enough if it's done faithfully. So, some half dozen miles further on, I stopped for the night at a village. At the inn, there I found a peasant hopelessly ill, and I advised those who were with him to see that he had the last sacraments. They agreed, and toward morning sent for the parish priest. I stayed there too because I wanted to worship and pray in the presence of the holy gifts, and going out into the street, sat down on the Zavalina, which is a bank of earth against the front wall of the house, flat-topped and used as a seat. Okay, so a little bench out front, to wait for the priest to come. All at once I was astonished to see running toward me from the backyard the girl who used to pray in the chapel. "What brings you here?" I asked. "They had fixed the day of my betrothal to a man I told you of, so I left them." And kneeling before me, she went on, "Have pity on me. Take me with you and put me into some convent or other. I don't want to be married. I want to live in a convent and say the Jesus prayer. They will listen to you and take me." "Goodness!" I exclaimed. "And where am I to take you to? I don't know a single convent in the neighborhood. Besides, I can't take you anywhere without a passport. For one thing, you wouldn't be taken in anywhere, and for another, it would be quite impossible for you to hide nowadays. You would be caught at once and sent home again, and punished as a tramp into the bargain. You had better go home and say your prayers there, and if you don't want to marry, make out that you are ill. The Holy Mother Clementa did that, and so did the Venerable Marina when she took refuge in a men's convent. There are many other cases of the same thing. It is called a saving pretense." I've never heard that before. That's a that's a very unique teaching. All right. While all this was happening, and we sat talking the matter over, we saw 4 men driving up the road with a pair of horses and coming straight toward us at a gallop. They seized the girl and put her in the cart, and one of them drove off with her. The other 3 tied my hands together and haled me back to the village where I had spent the summer. Their only reply to everything I said for myself was to shout, "We'll teach the little saint to seduce young girls." Oh boy.
Oh boy.
Yeah, really. Yikes. That evening, they brought me to the village court, put my feet in irons, and lodged me in gaol to wait for my trial in the morning. The priest heard that I was in prison and came to see me. He brought me some supper and comforted me, saying that he would do what he could for me, and gave his word as a spiritual father that I was not the sort of person they thought. After sitting with me for a while, he went away. The magistrate came late in the evening, driving through the village on his way to somewhere else, and stopped at the deputy's house, where they told him what had happened. He bade the peasants come together and had me brought to the house which was used as a court. We went in and stood waiting. In comes the magistrate, blustering, and sits down on the table with his hat on. "Hi, Epiphan," he shouts. "Did the girl, this daughter of yours, run off with anything from your house?" "No, sir, nothing," was the answer. "Has she been found out doing anything wrong with that fool there?" "No, sir." "Well, then, this is my decision and my judgment in the matter. You deal with your daughter yourself, and as for this fellow, we will teach him a lesson tomorrow and throw him out of the village, with strict orders never to show his face here again. So that's that." So saying, he got down from the table, went off to bed, while I was taken back to jail. Early in the morning, 2 country policemen came, flogged me, and drove me out of the village. I went off thanking God that he counted me worthy to suffer for his name. That's beautiful in a way, quite challenging. But it's that notion, in Christianity, suffering like that is considered a great blessing because they see it as sharing in the suffering of Christ when he was crucified. They find a comradeship or an intimacy with the suffering of Jesus, and so they associate their own unwarranted suffering to be a sharing in the suffering of Christ, who of course was crucified without reason. That counted me worthy to suffer for his name. Oh, that also reminds me, of course, of that most amazing thing about St. John of the Cross. He spent a year imprisoned in his monastery because he refused to follow the political orders of the local magistrate. And he was whipped daily, and so badly that they said that his tunic, his robes, had healed into the skin in the wounds of his back from the daily beatings. And he lived in a small room that was just barely big enough for him to lay down. He couldn't straighten out his legs, and they kept him in there for a year. And finally, he escapes, and a convent takes him in and hides him. And when he was dying several years later, one of the nuns who had saved him came to visit him and asked him if he had any regrets for his life. And he said, my only regret is that God did not count me worthy to let me suffer more for his name. Isn't that not amazing? Just unbelievable. That kind of dedication and surrender to the divine. That suffering is nothing for you. That suffering is a blessing, a gift. Really amazing fact or a facet of that Christian faith. This comforted me and gave me still more warmth and glow to my ceaseless interior prayer. You see, so even that hardship, he didn't grow bitter or angry at God. Why did you do that to me? It actually grew his inner faith and increased that sense of intimacy with God. None of these things made me feel at all cast down. It was as though they happened to someone else, and I merely watched them. We've heard this before. Are you seeing this? Even the flogging was within my power to bear. The prayer brought sweetness into my heart and made me unaware, so to speak, of everything else. That's that complete understanding, in the Vedanta of not being body-mind. It's that seeing it happen to someone else, that it's you just know the moods of the mind, the thrills of the mind, that they can't add or take from you. They're separate from you. They have no effect on you, the self, right? The effect is only within the mind itself. And it's only when you think you're the mind that you suffer for it. The same with the body, that we can withdraw from the body and not see its pains and whatnots as being our pains and whatnots. And so this is a very high spiritual state to attain. And it comes only through that practice of carefully discerning in the interior world so that you can see the separation and experience the separation, not as an idea, not as a philosophy, but you can see and will see that you are not, in fact, the body, have never been, that you are not, in fact, the mind, and have never been. And so this is a wonderful example of that happening even here. A mile or two further on, I met the girl's mother coming home from market with what she had bought. Seeing me, she told me that the son-in-law to be had withdrawn his suit. You see, he is annoyed with Akulka for having run away from him. Then she gave me some bread and patties, and I went on my way. The weather was fine and dry, and I had no wish to spend the night in a village. So when I came upon 2 fenced-in haystacks, as I went through the forest that evening, I lay down beneath them for a night's lodging. I fell asleep and dreamed that I was walking along, reading a chapter of St. Anthony the Great from the Philokalia. Suddenly my starets overtook me, that's my guru, overtook me and said, "Don't read that, read this," and pointed to these words in the 35th chapter of St. John Kaparthiski. A teacher submits at times to ignominy and endures pain for the sake of his spiritual children. And again, he made me note on the 41st chapter, those who give themselves most earnestly to prayer, it is they who become the prey of terrible and violent temptations. Then he said, take courage and do not be downcast. Remember the apostle's words, greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. You see that you have now had experience of the truth, and no temptation is beyond man's strength to resist, and that with the temptation, God makes also a way of escape. This is a wonderful promise right here. It's right out of, I think it's in Romans, one of Paul's letters anyway, that God will not tempt you. This is in the Christian perspective of things. God will not tempt you beyond the power with which he provides you to overcome it. And so it's Vivekananda saying to you, you are strength itself. You have all of the strength in the universe. And it's that strength of unity inside. You remember when we break that curse of duality that we were talking about, when you come to realize there's only one inside of you, one you and you, that there's no one in there who can argue with you. So when the mind is arguing with you, it's make believe. When you say no, I'm not going to eat that piece of cake, and then you start thinking maybe I will eat that piece of cake. That's not the mind. That's you giving your sentience to the mind and taking on an argument with yourself about whether you're going to have that cake or not. So it's that unifying in truth, that integrity. What you say, what you think, and what you do is always the same, and that's the source of strength. That truth within, that unity within. So no temptation is beyond a man's strength to resist, and that with the temptation God makes also a way of escape. Reliance upon this divine help has strengthened holy men of prayer and led them on to greater zeal and ardor. They not only devoted their lives to ceaseless prayer, but also out of the love of their hearts revealed it and taught it to others as opportunity occurred. Saint Gregory of Thessalonica speaks of this as follows: not only should we ourselves, in accordance with God's will, pray unceasingly in the name of Jesus Christ, but we are bound to reveal it and teach it to others, to everyone in general, religious and secular, learned and simple, men, women, and children, and to inspire them all with the zeal for prayer without ceasing. In the same way, the Venerable Callistus Telesudes says one ought not to keep thoughts about God, i.e., interior prayer, and what it has learned by contemplation and means of raising the soul on high simply in one's own mind, but one should make notes of it and put it into writing for general use with a loving motive. And the scriptures say in this connection, brother is helped by brother, like a strong and lofty city. Only in this case, it is above all things and necessary to avoid self-praise and to take care that the seed of divine teaching is not sown to the wind. Yeah, in the Vedanta, it is not so much our responsibility to teach. There's nothing necessary, but there is our surrender to the divine and our inspiration to love and to care. And you'll do that quite naturally by who you are. That's the best way. There's what is that movie, The Natural or something, where it says if you make honey, the bees will come. Oh, it's Thakur says that too. And in that one with that movie, I was thinking of that movie where he's building a baseball field in a cornfield, and he says, "Why would I do that?" And in his vision, he's told, "If you build it, they will come." And then Thakur says, "If you make honey, the bees will come." And so this is the best teaching. It's not it's not proselytization, because we see that that's not necessary. Mother is taking care of each person as they need. And sometimes she calls on you, and sometimes you don't know that she's called on you. Just the way that you live is inspiring. The things that you say are inspiring. The joy that you share in your heart is inspiring. And that's how spiritual teaching goes on in a healthy way. It's through surrender and to know the presence of Mother within. Always, always. I always look over my shoulder whenever I get a piece of praise or someone says something nice to me. Inwardly, I kind of look over my shoulder and wink my eye, at Mother, and just pass it on. I don't hold that for my own. And if somebody says something nice, I sometimes like to imagine that I've been given a flower to offer. Somebody praises something, then I think, oh, good, I've got a flower to offer Mother. And then in prayer, either then or later, usually then, because I'm too forgetful to do it later. But, I'll turn over and I'll say, here, Ma, here's a flower for you. And so that's the way we keep our ego from absorbing these things and stealing praise from the divine, right? Because one thing I always remember about myself is before I was this, before I was a monk, before I had any knowledge of any of these things, even as small as it is even now. There was a time when I knew even less. There was nothing in me that was inspiring. I was a very bitter, very sarcastic person, very caustic. And I remember those days. If left to myself, that's what I become. If I've become something else, it is because of the divine, because of Mother, because of that presence. And so we should always in our heart be like that, always passing praise and passing good things that have been said to us, offering them in the shrine of the heart to the divine. That's your opportunity. So when good things happen to you, don't deny them. No need to deny them. Don't play a false sense of modesty, but take them and offer them as a flower to the beloved, to the divine, and don't give them a second thought. After they've been offered, right? That's faith. It's faith. Now look what I've done. I've lost my place. Okay, there we go. I woke up feeling great joy in my heart and strength in my soul, and I went on my way. A long while after this, something else happened, which also I tell you about, if you like. One day, it was the 24th of March to be exact, I felt a very urgent wish to make my communion the next day, that is, on the feast of the Annunciation of Our Lady. I asked whether the church was far away, and was told it was about 20 miles. So I walked for the rest of that day and all of the next night in order to get there in time for matins. Matins is at 7 o'clock in the morning. So he had to walk, he had to walk 20 miles in a day and a night. That's quite a walk. But see how important it was to him, his spiritual life, this man. I love it. It's so inspiring to me to see someone whose spiritual life is so important. Nothing gets in the way. He's always practicing, he's always studying, he's taking these visions as if no problem, staying humble. He's always got his eyes open to help and to be positive, and yet he's doing what he needs to do. He's not being intimidated into anything. He sees the good and the bad in life both as being a walk with God. It's such a beautiful occurrence, such a beautiful story. The weather was as bad as it could be. It snowed and it rained. There was a strong wind and it was very cold. On my way, I had to cross a small stream, and just as I got to the middle, the ice gave way under my feet and I was plunged into the water up to my waist. Drenched like this, I came to Matins and stood through it, and through the liturgy which followed, and at which, by God's grace, I made my communion. In order to spend the day quietly and without spoiling my spiritual happiness, I begged the verger to allow me to stay in his little room until the next morning. I was more happy than I can tell all that day, and my heart was full of joy. I lay on the plank bed in that unheated room as though I were resting in Abraham's bosom. The prayer was very active. The love of Jesus Christ and of the Mother of God seemed to surge into my heart in waves of sweetness, and to steep my soul in consolation and in triumph. This is the truth of spiritual life. Boy, this is the truth of it. When the heart turns like that, all satisfaction comes from the divine alone. We lose that taste for the joys or the pleasures of people or the world. And that solitude, that quietness is our best support. Our Because that inner peace, it's yours. It's not a product of something. Your nature is that image of the beloved placed within you. And that image of the beloved is enough. It's full and overflowing. And it is the gift of grace. It's that silent mind that can feel and hear the presence of the divine within us. That's where we find our refuge. That's where we find our satisfaction. And that's why this pilgrim here is able to go through all of that hardship, a day and a night without sleep, falling through the ice, being freezing cold, laying on a plank, spending the night, going through that humiliation that he had been through, and not be daunted at all. Never felt like because he was a saint that he deserved something. not feeling like because he was a nice person, he deserved something, but to always stand ready, because you carry within you your own furnace of love. You carry within you your own furnace of grace, that relationship with the divine. And that's where your happiness comes from. That's where your comfort comes from. When you're not the body can't bother, and its conditions can't bother. If you know yourself, not the mind, then you know the mind and its conditions, its humiliations and whatnot can't bother. But to know the beloved inside, it's not just protection from the world. It's better than the whole sum of the world because it lasts and it's not conditional. It doesn't just burn when you're a good person. It doesn't just console you, when you're faithful. If you have the faith, it consoles you always. It's your very reason for continuing to live. Because the Lord knows in this world you can run to the end of your reason to live every now and then. It can get that difficult. But with this divine grace within, the divine presence, that's not a problem. That's never a thought. At nightfall, I was seized with a violent rheumatic pain in my legs, and that brought to my mind that they were soaking wet. I took no notice of it, and set my heart all the more to my prayer, so that I no longer felt the pain. In the morning, when I was wanted to get up, I found that I could not move my legs. They were quite paralyzed, and as feeble as bits of string. The verger dragged me down off the bed by main force, and so there I sat for 2 days without moving. On the 3rd day, the verger set about turning me out of his room. For, said he, supposing you die here, what a fuss there will be. My goodness. This is a man that just served him communion. But you see, being religious has nothing to do with spirituality or knowing God. You can know God and have no indication of religion and be a great servant, a great lover of everyone. But you can be a very religious person in a very high standing, and not understand it all. It really is a matter of the heart, With the greatest of difficulty, I somehow or other crawled along on my arms and dragged myself to the steps of the church and lay there. And there I stayed like that for a couple of days. The people who went by passed me without taking the slightest notice either of me or of my pleadings. In the end, a peasant came up to me and sat down and talked. And after a while he asked, "What will you give me if I cure you?" I had just exactly the same thing once, so I know a medicine for it. "I have nothing to give you," I answered. "But what have you got in your bag?" "Only dried bread and some books." "Well, what about working for me just for 1 summer if I cure you?" "I can't do any work, as you can see. I have only the use of one arm. The other is almost entirely withered." "Then what can you do?" "Nothing beyond the fact that I can read and write." "Ah, write. Well, teach my little boy to write. He can read a little, and I want him to be able to write too, but it costs such a lot. They want 20 rubles to teach him." I agreed to this, and with the verger's help he carried me away and put me in an old empty bathhouse in his backyard. Then he set about curing me, and this was his method. He picked up from the floors, the yards, the cesspools, the best part of a bushel of various sorts of putrid bones, bones of cattle, of birds, all sorts. He washed them, broke them up with a stone, and put them into a great earthen pot. Then he covered it with a lid which had a small hole in it, and he placed upside down on an empty jar sunk in the ground. He smeared the upper pot with a thick coating of clay, and making a pile of wood around it, he set fire to this, and kept it burning for more than 24 hours, saying as he fed the fire, "Now we'll get some tar from the bones." The next day he took the lower jar out of the ground. There had been dripped into it through the hole in the lid of the other jar about a pint of thick, reddish, oily liquid with a strong smell like living raw meat. Good Lord. If he goes on to drink this stuff, I know he's a man of faith. As far as the bones left in the jar, from being black and putrid, they had become white and clean and transparent like mother of pearl. I rubbed my legs with this liquid 5 times a day, and behold, 24 hours later, I found I could move my toes. Another day, and I could bend my legs and straighten them again. On the 5th day, I stood on my feet and with the help of a stick walked about the yard. In a word, in a week's time, my legs had become fully as strong as they were before. I thanked God and mused upon the mysterious power which he has given his creatures. Dry, putrid bones, almost brought to dust, yet keeping such a vital force, color, smell, power of acting on a living body, and as it were, giving life to bodies that are half dead. It is a pledge of the future resurrection of the body. How would I like to point out this to that forester with whom I live, in view of his doubts about the general resurrection? Having in this way got better from my illness, I began to teach the boy. Instead of the usual copybook work, he wrote out the prayer of Jesus. I made him copy it, showing him how to set out the words nicely. I found teaching the lad restful, for during the daytime he worked for the steward of an estate nearby, and could only come to me while the steward slept, that is, from daybreak till the liturgy. He was a bright boy, and soon began to write fairly well. His employer saw him writing and asked him who had taught him. A one-armed pilgrim who lives in our old bathhouse, said the boy. The steward, who was a Pole, was interested and came to have a look at me. He found me reading the Philokalia and started to talk by asking what I was reading. I showed him the book. Ah, said he, that's the Philokalia. I've seen that book before at our priest's, when I lived in the Vilna. They tell me, however, that it contains odd sorts of schemes and tricks for prayer written down by Greek monks. It's like those fanatics in India and Bokhara who sit down and blow themselves out trying to get a sort of tickling in their hearts, and in their stupidity take this bodily feeling for prayer. Oh, there we are. Look, we made it into the book. They take this bodily feeling for prayer and look upon it as a gift of God. All that is necessary to fulfill one's duty to God is to pray simply, to stand and say, Our Father, as Christ taught us. That puts you right for the whole day, but not to go on over and over and over again to the same tune. That, if I may say, is enough to drive you mad. Besides, it's bad for your heart. All right, so there you have a view of the other side in this world. But you see, what I'm liking and seeing here is how all things come together. You know, nothing is by chance. I just read this great poem by Rumi this morning, you know, that says to greet every day and whatever it brings with a laugh, and to serve it like a guest, whatever it might be, accept it in its fullness, because everything is a gift of the divine. To have that kind of attitude about everything. And when you live like that, you know, if you live in that quiet spirit inside, you see these things. You see that everything, like this wonderful puzzle of fullness, of wholeness, comes together. None of this is arbitrary. None of this is accidental. The universe is a harmony. And if you can find the right place to stand inside, that is the place of silence, the place of the observer, the witness, and watch ever so carefully with an equanimous mind, the story of the beloved unfolds, and no longer just the story of your own ego, but the story of the beloved, of the divine. And you see the purpose unfold in front. It's a beautiful experience and a beautiful book. And there's always going to be those that oppose, always those who have an odd view of ourselves or what we're thinking or what we're doing. There's no need to get upset They are playing their part just as we are playing ours. And we can go on quite harmoniously, each of us playing our part, give them the space to think what they must think and to do what they must do. Don't think in that way about this holy book, sir, I answered. It is not written by simple Greek monks, but by great and very holy men of olden time, men whom your church honors also, such as Anthony the Great, Macarius the Great, Mark the spiritual athlete, John Chrysostom, and others. It was from them that the monks of India and Bokhara took over the heart method of interior prayer. All right. This is something you have to know about Western culture, is that we were first at everything, and everyone learned from us. So here we're running right smack into that imperialistic mindset. It's just ego within a people group instead of an ego within an individual. So we just have to smile and carry on. The monks of India were doing this several thousand years before any of the monks in Mount Athos existed, or even before Jesus himself existed. And so these these peculiar prides, we just have to smile and move on. It was from them that the monks of India and Bokhara took over the heart method of interior prayer, only they quite spoiled and garbled it in doing so, as my starets explained to me. In the Philokalia, all the teaching about the practice of prayer in the heart is taken from the Word of God, from the Holy Bible, in which the same Jesus Christ, who bade us say the Father, taught also ceaseless prayer in the heart. For he said, Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart and all their mind. Watch and pray, abide in me, and I in you. And the Holy Fathers, calling to witness the holy King David's words in the Psalms, O taste and see how gracious the Lord is, explain the passage thus, that the Christian man ought to use every possible means of seeking and finding delight in prayer, and ceaselessly to look for consolation in it, and not be content with simply words saying, Our Father, once a day. Let me read to you how these saints blame those who do not strive to reach the gladness of the prayer of the heart. They write that such do wrong for 3 reasons. First, because they show themselves against the scriptures inspired by God. Secondly, because they do not set before themselves a higher and more perfect state of soul to be reached. They are content with the outward virtues only, and cannot hunger and thirst for the truth, and therefore miss the blessedness and the joy in the Lord. And thirdly, because by letting their mind dwell upon themselves and their own outward virtues, they often slip into temptation and pride and fall away. So you see, that third one's a very practical one. That third one, letting our mind dwell upon ourselves, right? So we're only thinking of ourselves, and our own outward virtues, what we look like from the outside rather than what we are from the inside, and often slipped into temptation and pride and so fall away. So that inward thing, that's why we keep the name going constantly, so that we're constantly thinking of the beloved, of the divine, that we don't get caught up in our selfishness. And, Sri Nisargadatta says that one of the marked differences between a saint and an ordinary man or woman is that a saint sees himself from the inside out, whereas ordinary people see themselves from the outside in. And when you think about that, that's true. Normally, when somebody asks something about yourself, you describe yourself from the outside. Describe yourself. Oh, I'm 58. I've got, mouse-colored hair, and, I'm always bright red, and I like these clothes and I don't like those clothes. We think of ourselves from the outside in, because it's quite a challenge, a challenge I present to you, to think of yourself from the inside out. If I was to ask you who you are and you describe yourself from the inside out, what are you going to say? How are you going to describe yourself? Which is very odd that it's so difficult, because you live on the inside. You're very comfortable with that notion. And so who are you? What are you? And so we should learn to think that way. And actually, when we sing the name of God or think of the name of God, we are describing ourselves from the inside out, right? After all, we start every sentence when we describe ourselves with the name of God. Is that not so? You know, I am this, I am that, I am whatever. So we always start with the name of God, I am. And then we add an adjective to it, to limit it, to restrict it, until it's small enough to be who we are. So don't forget that. You've always started from the inside by describing yourself, I am. That's enough. Don't add an adjective to it. Go inside and find that I am that you always talk about. And let yourself be known as that. And that is enough. It is sublime what you are reading, said the steward, but it's hardly for us ordinary layfolk, I think. Isn't that the universal the universal excuse? Oh, I'm not a monk. Oh, I couldn't do that. I'm just a householder. I've heard that so many times. God doesn't look at us as either of those. God doesn't care what you are on the outside or what your titles are. God is the I am within you. There's a presence. There's no concern of any kind in God's mind. There's nothing for God to be concerned about. Well, he wouldn't be God if he got concerned about things. You know? There's just that isness of perfection and harmony. That's who you are. That's how you describe yourself. Oh, me? Oh, I'm free. I'm loving. I do my best at wisdom. I take delight in silence and truth. I love peace. That's how we describe ourselves from the inside out. So, well, I will read you something simpler. How about people of goodwill, even if living in the world, may learn how to pray without ceasing? I found the sermon on George the Youth by Simeon, the new theologian, and read it to him from the Philokalia. This pleased him, and he said, give me that book to read at my leisure, and I will give you a good look into it some time. I will let you have it for 24 hours with pleasure, I answered, but not for longer, because I read it every day, and I just can't live without it. Well, then at least copy out for me what you have just read. I will pay you for your trouble. I don't want payment, said I. I will write out for you for love's sake, and in the hope that God will give you a longing for prayer. Some beautiful things in there. One that I can't live without it. Well, that's quite a statement. All right, well, we're going to stop there because that's a beautiful thought to leave hanging in the mind. Anybody have anything to say or to question or to point out, to
I
wonder?
do.
Yes, Ganga.
Hi. So it's good
Hi.
to see everyone. I'm so excited to see everyone. I know you guys can't see me. I'm behind the koala curtain right now. My question, I guess maybe it was more of a like comment and question in one. Um, for those of us going through a dry period or kind of the more agnostic mindset, um, really going through with the idea of a presence in the heart. Those specific sentences we read just a few moments ago, about the, what was it? It was about the acquiring of virtues externally versus
Mhm.
a more less superficial search for truth. I mean, sometimes it feels like my, or just like my faith in this path comes from seeing people with virtues. And, I haven't realized God.
Mhm.
So it's kind of what keeps me here. And I wonder if focusing too much on the idea of being a good person rather than searching for truth can be harmful. In dry periods, sometimes when we wake up, we think, it's good that I'm a good person. At least this helps
Mhm.
me with that. That's
Mhm.
kind of how I've stayed my course.
Yeah.
But I was just wondering, is there a certain danger to that? Is there a different way to respond to periods of dryness?
Well, I think there's a couple of different things in there. Periods of dryness, uh, they happen, and we just have to we just accept them and know that it isn't so. Know that the dryness is a state of mind. It's not the reality. And really, if you just quiet, even in those times of dryness, if you just go and sit in solitude, in quietness, um, in the idea of the beloved, if you're comfortable with that, if not that, just then within in the company of your own soul, your own self, because that bliss and the joy of living come from within us, not from any conditions. They're always present. And the things that make things dry is expectation. We think we should be feeling something or experiencing something that we're not, or from distraction, or from holding on to things in the past, like guilt or shame or whatnot, that generally can cause that dryness. But in that dryness, we go forward. Saint Teresa, stunningly enough, said that she had lived in a dry period for 40 years. And that was when she was doing all of that service and all of that caring. So she didn't dictate her relationship with the beloved based on a feeling, based on a sensation. So that's some teaching there. The idea about virtues is virtues don't come from outside. Virtues come naturally, like I was going to say like hair color, but nowadays you can't really use that example. But in that sense, somebody asks, "What's your color of your hair?" They say, "Oh, look, you're a redhead." And like, "Oh, yes, I'm a redhead. I work very hard at that. I've really disciplined myself very well." It's not. The color of your hair comes from the body that you're in. It doesn't come from an external thing. And so it is with virtues. That's why they're called fruits of the spirit. The fruits on a tree come from the tree being a tree. An apple tree puts out apples. You are a mark, an image of the divine. So all virtue should come from inside and will come from inside spontaneously and without effort when you put aside wrong ideas about yourself, when you realize that all of these descriptions of yourself are incomplete, that you are that divine spark within, you are that image of the beloved placed within you, and that the nature of that image is pure love, pure wisdom, and the existence that you enjoy. And so in those dry times, one is accepted. Who cares? That's irrelevant. Don't let a feeling or a condition define your relationship with God. God and you are together. Now, how do you know that? One, because you exist. Satchitananda, sat, that isness, your ability to say I am, is God. God, you are the verb of God's noun of being. God, we always say that God does not exist. God is existence itself. We are the verb of that existence because we are that image of God. We are that reflection of God. The fact that you can feel love for others and recognize love from others is also the witness of God's presence in you. That you are the verb. God is not loving. God is love itself. You are loving because you are that image, that verb, the reflection of the divine. And the same with wisdom. God is not wise. God is wisdom itself. And your wisdom is that gift from that. You are the reflection of the wisdom of the divine. So the fact that you are this direct reflection of God is the basis upon which we say that you are virtuous by nature. That which makes us unvirtuous is wrong identity. We identify with a body and a mind. And a body and mind are small. They're limited. They're restricted. And so they're needy. They're never secure, right? Because they contain an infinite soul who is whole and complete, full, love itself, wise itself, in full existence. And yet the body can't meet any of that. The body's existence is for a short period. The body's love depends on the state of its mind. The body's wisdom depends on the state of its mind. Its needs depend on the state of the body, and so by identifying with the body, saying, I'm the body, instead of knowing yourself to be the divine self, the soul within it that powers the body, we take on the limitations of body mind when we identify with it. And those limitations are what cause the virtues to be blocked. Our love comes out in a strange way, whereas in the soul, we know that we are all powerful, but the body is not all powerful, but it wants to express all powerfulness because the idea is within it from your presence, right, in there. And so the body tries to become all powerful. How? Well, by being super strong, or by being, cold-hearted so that you don't get dragged down by your feelings, or by having lots of money. The body tries to mimic the power of the soul in the material world, which it can never do, because the material world is finite and the soul is infinite. So as the soul tries to express through a finite body, which it has mistaken for itself, those hungers and those shortcomings make its love conditioned, make its immortality conditioned, makes its power conditioned. And those conditions then torment the body and causes selfishness, causes lust, causes greed, causes hunger for power, causes the desire for name and fame. You see, it's that identity with these limited assets that causes our virtue, the nature of ourself, to be blocked. And so in our spirit, in our practice, it's not about doing the right thing, because we're not the doers. We're taught by the scriptures many times. It's God acting through us. And that action of God is only limited by your idea of self. If you identify yourself with the image of the beloved, the ego is diminished. It no longer dictates based on its identity with the thoughts or condition of the mind, or the conditions and health of the body. It finds its fullness from the divine self within itself. And then the body just becomes a manifestation, an expression of perfect love. That's how a Jesus is born, or how a Buddha is born, or how a Rama is born. They're egoless, or their ego is very small. Ramakrishna's only ego, the only thing that kept his ego going, was a desire for the comfort of the devotee, or for the company, his desire for the company of the devotees. That was how he maintained a body. That's why his body didn't drop off when he went into samadhi. He longed for the company of the devotees. And so this is kind of how we deal with that. Am I answering your question at all, Ganga?
Yes. I feel like my question was kind of not phrased the best, but I think it helps a bit. No. I think it certainly helps. It's just when we get stuck in those places, it feels like how can we relate to this? What's holding me here?
Yeah, well, the best way is don't do it through. This is from Swami Prabhupada when one time we were reading the Mahabharata, and there's some weird things that happen in there, and I would bring them up, and he would say, "See, that's not how you read mythology." He said, don't get hung up by what's happening or what's actually being said in mythology. So that's not the point of mythology. He says, hear the mythology, and then feel the residue, pay attention to the residue of what that story did to you after it ran through you. So it's don't pay attention to the particulars in the mind. The answers aren't up here. They don't exist in thinking. Feel the presence, feel your presence. You don't have to imagine a separate presence from yourself of the divine. Become aware of your own presence. Become aware of your own awareness. That awareness within you, consequently, is God. But we initially may just think it's our own awareness, but that awareness is your I am. That awareness is your isness, and that is borrowed from the divine. So become aware of your own awareness in those dry times. Sit there, don't pay attention to the state of the mind that says, oh, this is dry, or to the state of the senses which say, oh, this is uninspiring. Who cares? That's a condition. That's temporary at best. Even if you were feeling divine fire within, that also is conditional at best. We're not going for a feeling. We're going for something way before a feeling. We're going for an isness, something that never changes, that's not conditioned. And your awareness and being aware of that awareness is the key to that knowledge, to that experience. It's not a relative knowledge that happens in mind. It's a relative knowledge that is manifested from your just simply being what you are. And it can only be accessed through that silence of mind, not accessed through a contemplation of mind, right? The reason we contemplate or repeat the mantra is not to keep something in the mind. It's to hold the mind at bay, hold the identity with mind at bay. You give us space to experience the isness, the I am of being, without being caught up in the cycle of thinking, which we are so accustomed to, which is why it's so easy to get caught up in it and what the mind says. It's the mind that's telling us it's dry. It's the mind that's telling us we're not virtuous, or that we're not this, or we are that, or whatever the descriptions are. All attributes come from mind. And so we're trying to put that at bay through the name, through the practice of japam. And the feeling of the presence isn't feeling God's presence. And we talked about it that way because, in fact, that's what it is. But that comes later. That knowledge also will rise up with that. In that silence, you become aware of that. Until then, just become aware of your own awareness, undefined. Just watch yourself watching. Watch yourself experiencing. Watch how the mind works. Catch yourself in moments of where the mind is trying to become unaware or to forget about its own awareness. Just watch. Don't think about it. Don't reason about it. Don't calculate about it. Just watch it. Don't have an opinion at all about it. Just watch it. And that will lead you, I think, to places that will answer these kinds of questions quite easily for you. And it'll be your own. It won't be my answer.
Well, your answer is good. Thank you. It helped a lot.
Very good.
Your answer is my answer anyway. That's
Awesome.
funny. Thank you so much.
Certainly. All right. Shall we call it an evening? All right. Jai Ma, Jai Thakur, Jai Swamiji,
Thank you.
Jai Jesus, Jai Buddha, Jai Rama, Jai Krishna. And all
Thank you,
the others.
Swamiji.
Indeed.
Thank you.
Be well, everyone. Good
Be
night.
well.